an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Vorkosigan saga, Shards of Honor, chapters 7 through 9. In these chapters, we have some pretty harrowing moments where it looks like Cordelia is going to get tortured and sexually assaulted. We just get a little torture and no sexual assault. I appreciate it. I just don't really want that. But I appreciate the threat feeling real. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to, who is it today? Vicky, for commissioning this episode. Vicky's here in the chat. Hi, Vicky. Thank you for commissioning this. Appreciate you. Y'all, so, I am not sure exactly how to talk about this because it makes me so incredibly uncomfortable. And that's like the point. I get it. I'm not like, I think the author did a smart thing here, for the record. You guys, there is a real tendency sometimes when you've got a sort of dichotomy in your population in whatever fantasy you're writing or TV show you're writing, to have it be that like one of the people who shouldn't be friends with the other finds out that they're not as bad as they seem, and that there's a lot of just misunderstanding, or you didn't realize your people were just as aggressive and maybe some of the shit done to you was deserved, or blah, 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 blah. And I kind of appreciate that Cordelia is like kind of defensive about Baryarans in these chapters, but then is shown that there is a very real reason that they have gotten the reputation they've gotten. And that, you know, granted, it may be a sort of like bad apple situation. I don't really think so. It seems deeply embedded in the culture overall. But when people are this bad an apple, it is going to overshadow any good apples that may be. Like, there's really no way around that. So I just kind of appreciated that she is having this sort of tendency toward wanting to keep people's talk about Baryarans from getting too aggressively like one-dimensional. And yet she then like comes up against this cartoonishly evil man. And when I say cartoonishly, this is not a criticism of the writing. Dudes like this exist. They're very real. And when I'm just going to say this. My father, I've mentioned on other shows, if you're new to Unspoiled, you won't have heard this before. But my father was Colombian. He's passed away about 12 years ago now. And he grew up really poor and was a mark for becoming part of the guerrilla movement in Colombia, offering, you know, family support, safety, food, and just maybe helping look after your family who doesn't have anyone to look out for them. And while he was part of this, he had to work with some pretty unsavory folks, because there is no, like, if you are working in this sort of system that is off book, there isn't really a chain of command with like HR at the top that you can go to and be like, hey, this isn't okay. We've got to stop this person, which is what has very much happened in this situation. And there was a man who my father talked about who tortured people and would have orgasms while he was doing it. And like, my father had a lot of baggage around things that he did, that he was party to. And I know that is something that really like got in his head. And I can't imagine being in the room with somebody who is like this. And I know it feels so heightened because of this whole situation. But, you know, this is my father who has experience with a person like this. That is no remove at all. How many more of these people must be out there if I have contact with somebody who knows a person exactly like this, or knew somebody like this is a lot more common than we want to think. We like to think of this kind of cartoonish evil as being like so rare as it to be almost legend, you know? And unfortunately, I just don't believe it's as rare as we pretend it is. Anyway, I just had to get that off my chest because it is a really tense scene and it is on my mind. So let's back up to chapter 7. Because the way that this jumps, I wasn't like understanding how much time had passed here. We jump to Captain Cordelia Naismith, Betan Expeditionary Force, fed the last normal space navigational observations into her ship's computer. Beside her, Pilot Officer Parnell adjusted the leads and cannulas to his headset and settled more comfortably into his padded chair, ready for the neurological control of the upcoming wormhole jump. This is so interesting. So she's asking the engineer if he is ready, and he says all set. He accepts the ship. There is a passage of a few seconds, and she gets really sick and nauseous, and then it's over. And when she gets the next message from the pilot, he says, "Ship is yours, ma'am," and it says, muttered the pilot wearily. The few seconds she had experienced translated to several subjective hours for him. I wasn't sure if the word subjective meant he actually experienced the time that she did not experience, or did it mean that he felt as much like 6 hours had passed, even if he didn't experience that time. The exhaustion was the same as that 6 hours. I wasn't really totally sure. Like, I don't know how this works exactly. And I just, it's not hugely important at all. But if anybody has like a particular explanation, I would be very interested to hear like the way the author is picturing how this works. I assume that it's meant to be that it felt like 6 hours to him. Not that the exhaustion was equal to 6 hours, because I don't see why she would experience that time differently than the pilot. But I thought maybe something about the neurological link to the ship was why. So I wasn't positive. Vicky says, my interpretation is that it feels like 6 hours to him, though I'm not certain. Okay. Like I said, it's not really that important, but I'm just super curious about it. 12,000 kilometers behind them, as if just emerged from the wormhole, a Betan dreadnought sprang into being. It accelerated astonishingly for so large a craft. Indeed, its speed matched their own. It followed them like an arrow. Aha! She clapped her hands in delight and cried into the intercom, "We've fetched them! They're all moving now! Oh, better and better!" Their pursuit ships slowed, preparing to turn and attack this much bigger prize. The 4 ships that had previously remained properly on station began to wheel away also. Minutes sped by. Her own shields were down now. "We can keep this up for about 10 more minutes," the engineer called up. "All right, save enough power to slag it when you're done. If we're captured, Command doesn't want one molecule left connected to another for the Baryarans to puzzle back together." What a crime. It's such a beautiful machine. I'm dying for a look inside. And she thinks you might, too, if the Baryarans capture us. The Betan dreadnought exploded with a spectacular radioactive light show. Unfortunately, there was no way to fake debris. I wonder how long it will take the Baryarans to figure out they've been had. I sincerely hope they have a sense of humor. I'm going to guess no. Her ship drifted dead in space, its power nearly depleted. She felt light in the head and realized it wasn't psychosomatic. The artificial gravity was failing. And they're all just floating around. Are we out of range? Gentlemen, I thank you all. Look away from the left port, please. She pulled the lever on the box. There was a soundless flash of brilliant blue light and a general rush for the tiny port immediately after to see the last red glow as the ship folded into itself, carrying its military secrets to a wandering grave. Now comes the tricky part. We could get away from those fat battle wagons, but their fast couriers would eat us alive. At least we look like a rock, she added, thinking of the artistic probe-reflective camouflage that encased the lifeboat like a shell. I think that's so neat. I love this idea. That they're just floating around looking like a fucking rock, and they have a bunch of people in there. Delighted. This is just a fun little ruse. I love this kind of shit. So they get out of here. She says, Parnell, give us a little realistic tumble. And her sense of time, it says, now begins to get truly disordered. And I was not sure if it was sort of an effect of the wormhole jump, if that sort of happens belatedly, or if it's just, the way that everything has been played here. I don't know. And then Parnell spat an oath like a sob. Tractor toe. That's it. She sighed without relief and reached out to key the shuttle back to life. Well, let's see what's caught us. What the hell have we got out there? Asked the engineer. 2 cruisers and a fast courier. We appear to be slightly outnumbered. I was just you guys, genuinely very, very concerned here. And it surprised me that I was so worried because I knew that she had this ally in Vorkosigan who is fairly high up the ladder. I should have felt like he would save and ultimately he does, but I was really worried that maybe she was going to play things a little bit too fast and loose because she was overconfident due to her connection with him, and then would find out that he doesn't carry the sway she had thought he did. She doesn't do anything like that. She does not want to blow his spot up. I deeply appreciate how intelligent she is, and anyway, I think we should try and make a break, Parnell said. No, these guys are professional paranoids. The sanest one I ever met didn't like being in a room with a closed door. Claimed you never knew what was on the other side. If they say they'll shoot, you better believe them. So then Parnell says, we wanted to let you know, Captain, that if you think blowing up the lifeboat might be the best thing for all concerned, we're with you. Nobody else is looking forward to being taken prisoner either. That's very courageous of you, pilot officer, but totally unnecessary. Don't flatter yourself. We were handpicked for our ignorance, not our knowledge. You all only have guesses about what was aboard that convoy, and even I don't know any technical details. If we cooperate on the surface, we've at least some chance of getting through this alive. It wasn't spilling intelligence we were thinking about, ma'am. It's their other habits. It's all right. Their reputation is way overblown. Quite decent fellows, some of them. I love the voice in her head, especially one, her mind mocked. And even assuming he's still alive, do you really think you could find him in all this mess? Or, finding him, save him from the gifts you yourself have brought from hell's hardware store without betraying your duty? Which, later on, we find out that he does indeed know about that, but there's a kind of weirdness about it. Or is this a secret suicide pact? Do you even know? Know thyself. But, of course, yeah, she turns him down, and a Barry Aaron fast courier took them in tow within an hour. So she gets brought inside with her men. They are stripped and searched. It says medically examined, holographed, retina printed, identified, and issued shapeless orange pajamas. And the fact that they were treated like this really got my fears going a little bit more. Not only the fact that they are just completely stripped of all of their own belongings, but it was also the fact that, like, so much identifying markers were taken that there is no way these guys, like, are able to fly under the radar later unless there is some pretty intense technology to get around retina prints and, you know, like all of that. I'm sure that tech exists, but it will definitely be a problem for them if things like go down in a certain way later. But yeah, I just, this whole thing really got me very, like, keyed up. And then her men are led away separately, and she is just like, oh God, I know I tried to downplay how much they need to worry about being tortured, but, like, I'm not totally sure how correct that is. So the guards snapped to attention. Turning, she saw a high-ranking Barry Aaron officer enter the processing chamber. The bright yellow of the collar tabs on his dark green dress uniform marked a rank she had not seen before, and with a shock she identified it as the color for a vice admiral. Knowing what he was, she knew at once who he was, and studied him with grave interest. Vorkosigan, that was his name, co-commander of the Barry Aaron Armada, along with Crown Prince Serg Vorbara. She supposed he was the one who did the real work. She'd heard he was slated to be the Barry Aaron's next Minister of War. And I don't know if this guy was mentioned by Vorkosigan or if it's supposed to be that she, like, found out about this due to her own intel about Barry Aaron's, because she's obviously been sent on this mission. And it's not made super clear how much time has passed since she escaped them. So I was a little bit, like, at sea here, you guys, and I'm just wondering if there's, I don't remember a point that it's actually specifically said. But yeah, this, she makes eye contact with him, and it's mentioned that he has, like, the most beautiful eyes she has ever seen in a man's face. And yet something about him is, like, repulsive to her. And this is such a total vibe for me. Like, I am somebody who can look at a person and be like, I can see that you are objectively very close to flawlessly attractive. And yet there will be something about them that I am just like, absolutely not. No. Like, and it says she broke eye contact, telling herself firmly that the unease and instant dislike were mere nerves, and waited. I don't know. And I've had a couple people recommend to me a book called The Gift of Fear, and I still haven't read it. I need to read it, but I had something like this happen, and I wasn't in anything like this vulnerable a situation. But when I was working at the bank many years ago now, there was a customer that came to my window, and I had a reaction to him that I have never had in my life to anybody. He was a balding, slightly overweight white man with glasses, and he came to my window, and I burst into a cold sweat and started to shake, and the words, "He kills women," just came into my head out of nowhere. And I wish sometimes that I had like written down his information. I don't know what I would have done with it, but just out of curiosity, you know? But it was a moment that, like I said, I've never experienced anything like it before, and I never have again. the only other time I've had a real voice in my head when I met somebody was a voice that said, you're going to marry him, when I met Brendan. And I did. So the fact that this is only the second time that has ever happened, I believe that voice. And I don't know what it is that tells us when somebody is dangerous. There's like some kind of sense that we have, even if there's not a logical way to explain where that feeling is coming from. And I'm not trying to say this always is the case. There are people who can seem harmless and you find out that they're monsters and you would have never guessed. But there are times where I think that we can feel something, and because there isn't anything that's like objectively, tangible that you can point to from where this feeling is coming from, you just try to ignore it and tell yourself you're being crazy. But I think that when that shit pops up out of nowhere, it's something. That's all I'm saying. And this is when he has her stripped and has her turned around, and he circles her, watching her. The two grinning soldiers guarding her obeyed. I don't like the way this is starting out. She forced her face to blandness, holding on to all her secret sources of serenity. Calm, calm. This one wants to rattle you. You can see it in his eyes, his hungry eyes. Calm. A little old, but she'll do. I'll send for her later. The guards shoved the pajamas back at her. She dressed slowly to annoy them, like a striptease in reverse, with precise, controlled motions of the sort suitable for a Japanese tea ceremony. One growled, and the other shoved her roughly in the back toward her cell. Oh my God, I don't know why that cracked me up so bad, but just the idea of dressing real slowly, like instead of I'm going to scramble for my clothes and get into them as fast as I can to indicate how incredibly uncomfortable I was. Instead, it's I'm going to dress really fucking slowly so that you don't think there's anything about being naked that bothers me at all, and just kind of hold your day up for no good reason. I just love it. What a power play. For nothing. It doesn't like get her anywhere, but I just like it as a sort of fuck you, That's great. And I even hear, you guys, with him being like, strip her, and then she's a little old, but I'll come for her later. I was still hoping that it was going to turn out to like not quite be what it looked like, what it sounded like. I was still very much like in denial about the situation. But about an hour later, there's a guard that comes back and says like, oh, he wants you, come on. And she goes into this room. The bulkheads had been knocked out of the two adjoining chambers, giving a triple share of space. It was full of personal furnishings of a most luxurious order. Admiral Vorkosigan, I hope I'm saying that right, rose from a velvet-covered seat as she entered, but she did not mistake it for a gesture of courtesy. He walked slyly around her as she stood silent. A step up from that cell, eh? He probed. For the guard's benefit, she replied, looks like a whore's boudoir. The grinning guard choked, and the other one laughed outright, but cut it off at a glare from Vorkosigan. I genuinely was cracking up. Like, there's no reason to have this attitude. It's potentially only going to get your situation, like, degraded from where it originally was. If you make him pissed, he could just beat the shit out of you immediately for it. However, as much as I like, my instinct is to physically try to protect myself from harm, I also have to recognize the point of all of the way this guy moves is to elicit fear, and she is trying to keep him from seeing any. So I can understand not wanting to give him what he's after and hoping that, like, maybe he just won't keep pressing the issue or be bored with her because she isn't giving him the response he's looking for. So anyway, buckle her in and return to your posts. I'll call you when I'm done. She was placed on her back across his wide non-regulation bed, arms and legs stretched to the four corners and tautly attached by soft bracelets to short chains, attached in turn to the bed frame. Simple, chilling, quite beyond her strength to break. The guard, who pitied, whispered to her under his breath as he buckled a wrist strap, hidden almost inaudibly in a sigh, "Sorry." "It's all right," she breathed back. "That's what you think now," murmured the other through his grin. "I want to know who that is. Who's that? Who's just like, hee, you're going to be tortured and raped. You think it's fine. I just want to talk. Throw me his addy." And so she says, "Looks like a permanent installation," she observed to Vorkosigan, horribly fascinated. It was like a sick joke come to life. "What do you do when you can't catch Betans? Call for volunteers?" A frown appeared between his eyes, then smoothed. "Keep it up," he encouraged. "It amuses me. It will make the ultimate denouement so much more piquant." And so at first when he frowned, I thought that she had sort of got him. But I think all it was that he was expecting, after she had been strapped down here, that she would immediately start begging or crying or panicking. And the fact that she's just out here cracking a joke, he's a little disappointed. I think that's all it is. And she's thinking, she tried to string herself along. Maybe he's only a rapist. You guys, when you are in this sort of situation and you are thinking to yourself, maybe he's only a rapist, very hopefully, you know that shit's bad. That's not a place you want to be. Hoping somebody's only a rapist. Fucking Christ. She tells him, "I don't know any secrets." And he's like, "I didn't think you knew secrets. Like, I'm sure if you do, I'll know them very soon. But," and he says, "you'll undoubtedly insist on telling me everything you know over the next few weeks." Guys, can we just stop and think about that? Apparently, this is like the standard for him. Weeks. I mean, that is horrifying. Having this sort of thing done to you at all. But being kept, that is just a true nightmare. And he says that he's like kind of glad now that she's older, because the younger ones just immediately sort of collapse, and you are going to be a lot harder, and it's going to be way more fun. Oh, this whole thing. So he takes out a knife. He slices off her pajamas and lets the knife slip, and it's like slices into her thigh. And it says it was in the area without sensation. Is that something that we knew? That she had a spot in her thigh where the nerves were just dead? I don't remember this. I'm sorry if this was mentioned and I just forgot. But because her nerves don't work there, when he slices in, she doesn't feel a thing, and she's just like, "Yeah, I don't have nerves there." Or no, she doesn't tell him that. She tells Vorkosigan later when he asks if it hurt, But yeah, the fact that she doesn't have a reaction, he's clearly disappointed. And he says, "I don't have time to rape you today," which is funny because you have time to watch somebody else rape her. So I feel like you do have time to rape her. It almost made me wonder at the time if he was just incapable, but then he climbs on top of her. So I guess he was. But yeah, he's talking about his favorite centuries and the fact that there is some fucking dude who where is it? "I came upon the loveliest scene where a certain great lady was raped by a diseased servant on the orders of his master. Very piquant. Venereal disease is, alas, a thing of the past, but I am able to command a diseased servant, although his disease is mental rather than physical." This is hideous. And he brings in this man who is a paranoid schizophrenic who hears voices. And he says that I have used him before many times. And I loved the way that she was able to see how fucked up this was for this man, because this dude could easily have been just made an object of terror, in this scene. But the author really wanted to point out the fact that this guy doesn't want to be here and is being used and abused as well. And it's like extra gross when you stop and think about how both of them are victims. And she recognizes him as Bothari. And it says, how could he have hit her on her personal nightmare? A kaleidoscope of images spun through her memory, a dappled wood, the crackle of disruptors, the faces of the dead and the half-dead, a looming shape like the shadow of death. Would he recognize her? His eyes had not yet touched her. They were fixed on Vorkosigan. Too close together, those eyes, and not quite on the same level. They gave his face an unusual degree of asymmetry that added much to his remarkable ugliness. And she is looking at him and realizing, like, he does not want to be here. Like, this is not somebody who's like, oh, I can't wait until I get to rape another lady. This dude is being treated like some sort of weird pet. And she says, Vorkosigan, do you imagine, or she's thinking this to herself, in your amoral, flashy freakiness, in your monstrous vanity, that you control this elemental, and you dare play games with that sullen madness in her eyes? There are two victims in this room. There are two victims in this room. So he says, rape me this woman, and climbs into a chair and sits to watch. And Bothari starts to climb on top of her and stops and recognizes her. And she says to Bothari, I believe that the tormented are very close to God. I'm sorry, Sergeant. What an incredibly beautiful thing to say. Like, why was this so moving? I don't know what I expected from her, but that is just, it's like horrible. I'm not sure if I believe it, but in the moment is so kind and compassionate. And he backs away from her and says, I'm not doing it because she's Vorkosigan's prisoner. And I was really hopeful that Vorkosigan would be like, oh shit, oh, what do I do? But instead, he gets so excited and is like, oh my God, I fucking got him. And I was devastated. My heart sank so far down into my shoes. And he says this could be even better than the day I told him about his wife. The expression on his face was strange and startling, the mask of suavity seeming to melt and run off in patches. It was like stumbling over the center of a caldera. He seemed to remember the mask and clutched its pieces around him half effectually. That was really interesting. I don't really know how to imagine that, but it was just there was something like childish about it, like he had this excitement of like, oh my God, I got a present. And the day I told him about his wife, I'm assuming he was the one who like told him your wife's been cheating on you, which, I wonder if he has any idea that Vorkosigan killed those two men, because Vorkosigan says that those two men are accepted as having killed each other. But I feel like if you're the one who told him that his wife was cheating on him, and those dudes just wind up dead, you're probably going to have your suspicions. I don't know. But anyway, he then says some things that I was like, what is happening? He says, I've embraced a number of things in my time, not least of which was your Puritan lover. Let your imagination dwell on that a while, my dear, my sweet, my pet. You'd scarcely believe it to meet him now, but he was quite a merry widower before he gave himself over to so irrationally to these random outbreaks of righteousness. Word? He has been fucking with him in the past? I can't tell how literally to take this. Like, I am into a bisexual Vorkosigan. Do not get me wrong. Down with it. But I just did not see that coming at all. Wow. Okay. Like, and I don't know if it's a case of like, he is actively bisexual, or if it's a case of like, you know, I got drunk and did some shit, but I'm not really super into it, because that can happen. But she doesn't, like, understandably bring that up. And I am wondering if she ever will. I'm curious about it. And so he decides, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut off a piece of your hair, a lock of it. And then at dinner, I'm going to take it out and stroke it casually, and he'll spot it and completely lose his mind. I cannot wait. He's so excited. And he's like, I have to be really careful how I do this, because if he gets too riled up, he'll just be unmanageable. But it's much easier to start than stop. He's become remarkably temperate of late. Your influence, or is he simply growing old? So he gave vent to a stream of plans for torturing Vorkosigan through her, glistening with obscene detail. He was taut with his vision, his face pale and moist. And she's like really starting to get worried about this. She is showing the fact that she's scared in a way that she wasn't before. And he's like, you know what? I'm energized. I'm going to go ahead and rape you myself after all. Oh, this will be so much better. And he starts climbing on top of her. And it says, Sergeant Bothari had been mooning about the room, head moving from side to side and narrow jaw working, as Cordelia had seen it once before, a sign of agitation. Vorkosigan, intent on Cordelia, paid no attention to the movements behind him. So his moment of utter astonishment was very brief, when the sergeant grabbed him by his curly hair, yanked his head back, and drew the jeweled knife most expertly around his neck, slicing through all four of the major vessels in a swift double movement. The blood spurted over Cordelia in a fountain, horribly hot and flowing. Vorkosigan dropped between her legs and slithered down out of sight over the end of the bed. Oh boy. I mean, delighted. Absolutely flawless. Perfect. I love it. But, ew. All of it. Yuck. Ugh. 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 Anyway. She's sitting there and is just, you know, naked, covered in blood. And it's like, what do I do? Oh, I gotta get dressed. Okay. And understandable. Like, you know, and Bothari is kind of freaking out a little bit. She's saying, thank you. That was a very knightly deed. Do you suppose you could unbuckle me too? Oh God. But yeah, he helps her get out. She starts getting dressed. A couple of drawers contained his toy collection, and she shut them hastily, nauseated, finally understanding what he'd meant by his last words. The man's taste in perversions had certainly had remarkable scope. I'm really curious what that's about. I'm not excited about it. I don't really want to know. Like, I kind of want to know, but like, So finally she finds some black fatigues, pulls those on, and then somebody busts in the door, and it's Vorkosigan. And I love that he's just a little too late. It's just kind of fun, you know? I really wonder what he would have done if he had come in and this dude was still alive and trying to rape her. I feel like that would have just been an end of that man. So either way, this dude's ending up dead. But I like the fact that Bothari gets to do it because this man has tormented him for so long. And just good on you. I feel like that probably felt pretty good. So he comes in, she says about the body, there's been an accident. I was just like, I guess that's one way to say it. He has somebody with him named Ilian, and he has him come in and close the door. You're going to have to witness this with the greatest attention. His lips pressed to a white slit. Vorkosigan walked slowly around the room, noting the details, some of which he pointed out silently to his companion. The lieutenant said, at the first gesture, which was with the plasma arc. Vorkosigan stopped before the body, looked at the weapon in his hands as though seeing it for the first time, and put it in its holster. Been reading the Marquis again, have you? He addressed the corpse with a sigh. He turned it over with the toe of his boot, and a little more blood ran out of the meaty slice in his neck. There is something about the meaty slice in his that's so horrifying. And of course, I'm just assuming it's the Marquis de Sade, and that's the story about the woman being raped by a servant with a venereal disease. I'm guessing. But there is a conversation here between the two of them. She has to restrain herself because she wants to just throw her arms around him. But he's got his people with him. It's really just like the whole thing feels inappropriate. So she's having to clamp down on that and just talk with a focus on what's immediately relevant. And she's like, how annoyed is everyone going to be about this? And Vorkosigan says the Emperor, for one, will be delighted, but strictly in private. And he is sort of thinking she's the one who did it, but she explains that it's Bothari. There's something about this that reminds me forcibly of that remarkable scene when we broke into my engine room. It has your personal signature. My grandmother had a phrase for it, something about late and $1. A day late and $1 short? Yes, that was it. And he looks at her and he says, was I short? Clearly just trying to be like, did he get a chance to rape you? And she says no. I hope that I would not have changed his mind about her if he were too late. Jesus Christ. So he goes and checks Bothari, and he says that bloody bastard has about ruined him again. He was almost well after his time with me. And I was really wondering about that. I'm assuming, of course, just not abusing him would be a big step. But also, was he getting treatment? Was he getting medication that he isn't taking anymore? I was just curious about how this is going to be handled because, this was written a while ago and our takes on mental health have come a long way in a lot of ways. And Bothari, it doesn't feel like we're getting anything from him that is, for example, it would be very easy to have him be the villain because he has schizophrenia. But instead, this author is framing it as, no, he is a victim because he has schizophrenia and is vulnerable to being used like this by somebody. And I think that bodes well. But, the potential for other directions to show up as well. So she says, were you here all this time? And he says, I'm not captain, I'm staff. My courier got in from the front a few hours ago. I've been in conference with Admiral Vorhalas and the Prince ever since. And we find out that his room is literally the next one over from this one, which there's something about that's truly awful. I don't know why it makes it so much worse, but him being potentially right there and not knowing, you guys, it just got to me a little bit. I just hated it. So he says, when she says, I'm surprised you serve that man. He says, I serve the Emperor. She became conscious of Ilian standing silent and watchful. And he introduces Ilian and he says, he's my spy. It's Captain Naismith now, she put in automatically. The lieutenant shook her hand with a bland, calm innocence, wholly at odds with the bizarre scene they had just left. He might have been at an embassy reception. Who do you spy on? I prefer the term surveillance, he said. Bureaucratic weasel wording, put in Vorkosigan. The lieutenant spies on me. He represents a compromise between the Emperor, the Ministry of Political Education, and myself. So, evidently, this dude has, basically, recording devices in him. What? He has an eidetic memory biochip. Let me look up what eidetic means and how to pronounce it. Eidetic. Relating to or denoting mental images having unusual vividness and detail as if actually visible. Ooh, that's neat. Okay. You may think of him as a recording device with legs, which the Emperor may play back at will. Yikes. That feels just terrifying. I don't know how you get in this position. I don't know how, what brings you to a point where they're like, hey, you want to get an implant that'll make you remember shit exactly so that you can just tell people what is up and gossip nonstop. What? I wouldn't say no to the job. I mean, I'm sure I'd be a target, but there's something about just being in on the mess without having to be in the mess that I think sounds appealing. It's like being a member of TMZ, Anyway, so the whole thing that they're trying to figure out how they're going to play this, and there's just blood, the knife. There's no real way to pretend something else happened. And he also notes that the fact that Bothari is mentally ill is not going to change the way that he is seen by the prince. And he says, you will simply have to have escaped before Ilian and I arrived on the scene. I don't know how long it will be possible to hide Bothari in here. Maybe I can get him some sedatives, which, there's a lot of drugs being used and it starts to get a little bit much. But anyway, she has Bothari sit down. She tries to administer this ampule. And it's so the way she's trying to get him to allow her to administer it, he is resistant. He's talking about how the beast's drugs made the demons drunk. And then she says, come to attention, soldier, trying for a different approach. And it absolutely seems to trigger him, actually, and makes everything worse. And he just throws her and I believe cracks a couple of her ribs. And he is on top of her, with a knee in her chest and starting to strangle her. And it says, one knee pressed into her ribcage. She popped her eyes open in time to see his eyes roll back because as he's lunging at her, she administers this drug. His hands slackened in their twisting, and he rolled off her to his hands and knees, head wagging dizzily, then slumped to the deck. She is not enjoying herself, understandably. And Vorkosigan comes in, and I was just how did you not tell him about what happened here? He is just acting like everything is going great for him, even though he is under arrest and confined to quarters. And she herself is just oh yeah, it went fine, even though she just got her ribs cracked and was almost strangled to death. The both of them are not okay. Okay? I'm just saying, both of these people are fucked up in the head. And in the exact same way, it feels so good, I guess. If you can meet each other halfway on this, that's half the battle. But I just want to acknowledge how much they each just don't act like the thing that just happened is what happened. And that is sort of ongoing. So when she's like, okay, I don't understand though. You're acting like that was good. And Vorkosigan says to Alien, who's like, I'll have to report this conversation. Vorkosigan's, what conversation? You and I are alone in here, remember? You're not required to observe me when I'm alone. As everyone knows, they'll start wondering why you're lingering in here before long. The Emperor's intention. Yes? Tell me all about the Emperor's intention. Vorkosigan looked savage. The Emperor's intention, as communicated to me, was that you be discouraged from incriminating yourself. I cannot edit my report, you know. That was your argument 4 weeks ago. You saw the result. What does that mean? Is the 4 weeks ago when the mutiny was? And so he's saying, like, if you hadn't told them what you did, they wouldn't have tried for me? I wasn't totally sure. I say I'm not totally sure. I'm not at all sure. And I'm not sure if I'm meant to be sure. That's the part that always kind of trips me up in these sorts of situations is if it's being kept from me because it's going to be a slow reveal, fine, and I'll just theorize about it. But if I'm not certain that I, as a reader, was supposed to remember something, that is when I start to get worried. But yeah, so he says, grant me this. You gave me your word on it then. Do you intend to take it back? If he is having a conflict between duty and conscience, it is not solvable without redefining one or the other, and he must now choose which. Oh my God, I forgot that Alien just tells. Oh my God, it's right here, you guys. I'm so sorry. Alien says there was another incident like that with a prisoner a few weeks ago. Commodore Vorkosigan wanted to do something about it then. I talked him out of it afterwards, and he stutters there, which makes me think this person wound up dead. Afterwards, I agreed that I would not interfere with any action he chose to take should the situation come up again. Did Vorkosigan kill her? Asked Cordelia morbidly. No, said Alien. He stared moodily at his boots. Is that the girl that we see later? What happened? Oh dear. I don't love it. I don't love it. Oh God. So, long story short, they have to smuggle food in for her, and they have to just keep her on the DL. And the big dude who has been drugged at one point begins snoring, and they have to drug him again, even though it's a little too early, and this man gets fucked up. But Vorkosigan, firstly, before we get there, explains to her why this arrest isn't so bad. He says, first of all, you have no idea how much I needed one sane person here, which the fact that there's nobody sane here is truly awful. Like, imagine being alone in a place like this, like feeling like there's nobody you can really turn to. Jesus Christ. So this is when she asks if he has a change of clothes for her. And it turns out that he saved the clothes that she had left and like stitched them and washed them and neatly folded them. And when she's like, why did you save my clothes? He says, well, it was all you left, except for the shuttle your people abandoned, which would have made a rather awkward memento. And she's like delighted, but as she's walking out, she's going into the bathroom to change. She says, I've still got my Barrieren uniform at home wrapped in paper in a drawer. She gave him a firm nod, his eyes lit. I love the way they flirt. They are so awkward. Like, not really awkward, but like the way that they flirt. It's unhinged. You know, it's like they're just I already said that they're fucked up, and I just stand by that. It's fine. It's great. Everybody is. You got to find the person that jives with you. Your fucked upness complements each other, and they have. I love that for them. But it is, though. It's fucked up. So I take it you didn't get charged with treason after all. That turned out something of a draw. I was recalled back to Barriar after you escaped. Minister Grishnov was practically drooling on himself. He was so convinced he'd got me at last. But my case against Radnov was airtight. The Emperor stepped in before we could draw blood and forced a compromise. Or more correctly, an abeyance. I haven't actually been cleared. The charges are still pending in some legal limbo. He was giving Grishnov and the whole war party everything they'd asked for, the entire Escobar scheme on a platter and more. He gave them the prince and all the credit. After the conquests of Escobar, Grishnov and the prince each think they're going to be the de facto ruler of Barriar. He even made Vorkosigan swallow my promotion, pointed out he'd have me directly under his command. Vorkosigan saw the light at once. Ugh. And she asks, how long have you known him? And it says his eyes slid away from her. And I'm like, because you are not telling the entire story now, are you? And he says, like, when we were in school, he was just a voyeur, but he started getting worse. And the higher up in things he got, the more he felt like he could get away with. And, like, he was kind of right. He could get away with it. And she thinks you knew him better than that, my breath. My breath? What is this? Song of Ice and Fire? I mean, that feels very poetical. I'm fine with it. And I don't think he would hate it. He seems like the type that would get very into this sort of language, actually. But it caught me a little off guard. I wasn't ready. So there's a little bit of a back and forth between the two of them talking about, like, fantasizing about going to see the other. And he's like, yeah, sometimes I fantasize about just running off to Beta Colony and turning up on your doorstep. Do you have a doorstep? Not as such, but go on. And I'm like, what does that mean? You don't have a doorstep? I mean, maybe it's just a flat entry, but I don't know. That still counts to me, but I'm curious about what that means. And he says it isn't exactly like a nightmare, like waking from the nightmare to see your face. More like knowing while dreaming that beyond the dream there is a waking world. I mean to join you in that waking world someday. You'll see. You'll see. And I was like, well, that is very adorable. So then he says, get some sleep while you can. And chapter 9 is she woke to movement and voices. Now, at the end of this chapter, he tells her that he questioned her using a drug in her sleep. But there is nothing to indicate that she felt it when she slept. I don't know what, or maybe this is the wrong sleep. Maybe there's one that comes a little later. I just was very confused at how that was meant to have worked. And I think it's this guy who says, like, smooth, sir. And I guess that's meant to be smooth in how seamlessly he slipped it to her and that she didn't notice it. And I should mention that Vorkosigan gives him, like, a dirty look. And I was sort of surprised by that. I'm like, well, you did the thing. But I don't know. It was just, that really caught me off guard. So this is when they have to get everybody into the bathroom hiding because the prince is coming with Vorhalis. And the prince of fucking Vorkosigan goes up into this prince's face in a way that really I was not ready for at all. This dude did not give a fuck. And a part of me really respects that. And a part of me is like, how in the hell Have you not been court-martialed? Or like the target on Vorkosigan's back, for the most part, I had thought was there because he is like a decent dude in a sea of monsters. But also, maybe, Vorkosigan, you could just not mouth off like this to a prince, and then people wouldn't be after you like they're after you. Like, just really? You know, going in on him the way that you do isn't going to change what he does. Like, I don't know. Anyway. So he comes in, and he says, let's see. I'm sorry. I'm trying to find the spot. The Escos are falling back through the whole volume. They've even abandoned that sluggish match for the wormhole jump to Tau Ceti. We've got them on the run. The owner of the second voice also wore dress greens, more heavily encrusted with gilt than any she had ever seen. Jeweled decorations on his breast glinted and winked like lizard's eyes in the light from Vorkosigan's desk lamp. He was about 30, black-haired, with a rectangular, tense face, hooded eyes, and thin lips compressed now with annoyance. "You're not both going, are you?" said Vorkosigan. "The senior officer ought to properly stay with the flag. Now that Varuchir is dead, his duties devolve on the prince. That dog and pony show you had planned was based on the assumption that he would still be at his post." And the prince takes umbrage with him saying dog and pony show, and just is basically like, I'm going to lead my troops because my father and his cronies keep saying I'm no soldier, so I'm going to show them. And Vorkosigan just tells him, you're going to go and sit in that fucking palace, and you're going to party, and you're going to let your men do the dying for you until you've bought your ground by the sheer weight of the corpses piled on it. Woo! Because that's the kind of soldiering your mentor has taught you. My God. I cannot believe he just said that shit. What is this, Macklemore? This is like Heinz Hall here. He's just telling it. Damn. Wow. And when the prince says you go too far, especially for a man who will get no closer to the fighting than clinging to the wormhole exit for home, if you want to talk of undue caution, his tone clearly made the phrase a euphemism for an uglier term. And Vorkosigan says you can hardly order me confined to quarters and then accuse me of cowardice for not being at the front. Yeah. What do you think you're doing here, Princey? What are you talking about? And then he says, even Minister Grishnov's propaganda has to simulate logic better than that. Oh, brutal. Jesus Christ, stop. He's already dead. Vorkosigan absolutely, it's like fucking Kendrick and Drake in here. My God. I just look, again, I respect the shit out of it, but I'm also like, do you need to go this hard, dude? Like, does it have to be this way? I don't know. Oh, it is funny though. So, the prince then says, well, you just love that. Stick me back here and grab all the glory for yourself and that wrinkled clown Vortala and his phony progressives. Over my dead body, you're going to sit in here till you grow mold. So again, you're like, oh, you're such a coward, but then like, no, you can't come. Sir, I'm going to need you to pick a fucking lane and choose it. Thank you. And so eventually Vorkosigan's like, you have a certain post that you are meant to stay in. And I am officially protesting the fact that you are going to abdicate your responsibility. And the prince is just like, go ahead and protest. But your daddy ain't going to live forever. I will be able to come for you. As soon as he's gone, I'll fuck your entire life up. And then, or perhaps you'll find yourself back on the leper colony for another 5 years of patrol duty. And this is when Bothari starts snoring, and Ilian just pretends that he's coughing horribly and just goes into the bathroom. Oh my God, that cracked me up. But later on, there's a conversation. Vorkosigan is just like, what's the leper colony? And Vorhala says, have you never heard that? Have you ever wondered why you've always got the fuck-ups before? The people who were like almost discharged? And Vorkosigan's like, I figured that they were going to fuck me by giving me shitty people. I didn't expect better of that. But he says they used to call it Vorkosigan's leper colony at headquarters. And Vorkosigan is not offended by this at all. He's just like, no shit. I'm leper in chief. And then optimistically, well, if they were the worst the service has to offer, perhaps we shall not do so badly after all. I love that attitude. Good for you, man. Instead of being like, those fucking assholes, you're just like, hey, maybe that bodes well for our guys, actually. I like to think that these people got sent here because they weren't like able to fall in line with some of the bullshit. And so they found somebody else who also kind of like bucks the expectation sometimes and were able to thrive a little bit more under his command than they were with the others. But obviously there was a mutiny, so that didn't universally happen for everybody. So anyway, let's see. They're talking about whether or not the Escobarians, I think, are going to counterattack. And Vorkosigan's like, well, of course they will. And, you know, we're going to try and hold it for as long as possible. The prince doesn't see it your way. Yes, he's itching to lead a parade. What do you advise? I'm not your commander. Not my fault. I recommended you to the emperor. I know. I wouldn't take it. I recommended you instead. So we ended up with that sodomizing son of a bitch Ferruccio. Something wrong there. And I was just like, yeah, a lot of somethings. So eventually he gets him out the door. And this is when they notice that Bothari has stopped breathing and they have to get him back to life. The poor fucking guy. I love the fact that, like, they have to switch places. Initially, she's pounding on his chest, and then she takes over breathing into his mouth. And some of Vorkosigan's, his saliva is on Bothari's mouth. And here it is. The parody of a kiss was horrible, but to shrink from it beneath contempt. Beneath contempt is always just such, I love that phrase. But yeah, the idea that, like, you've never kissed, but this is how, like, there is something real weird about that. I'm glad that it was addressed, you know, just very uncomfortable. So eventually they managed to get him back. And thank God, because if Bothari died here, I was going to be truly upset about it. He deserves better. You know, that's really what it comes down to for me. So let's see. What do we do now? Wait, pray the dosage is right. He glanced irritably at Ilian, and that it won't send him into some kind of manic state. Shouldn't we be thinking of some way to get them both out of here? Protested Ilian. Think away. Vorkosigan began plugging the new data disks into his console and viewing tactical readouts. But as a hiding place, it has two advantages not shared by any other spot on the ship. Yeah, that's a pretty good point. I don't know. I feel like just keep him here. No. So he says, if you're as good as you claim, it's not monitored by either the chief political officer or the prince's men. And Ilian says he would stake his reputation on it. And that is interesting that he, like, it's one thing to be like, I'm not going to interfere if you decide to stop this torturer. That's like one agreement, but this is like, he's low key working for Vorkosigan now, which, I have to assume is just a result of observing this man repeatedly doing good things and eventually just being like, all right, look, I gotta level with you. I don't want to turn you in on stuff. You know, I don't know. I feel like there, you know, he did say earlier that it's meant to be for Vorkosigan that he is here, not to be used against him exactly. I don't know how much I believe that, but maybe it's more true than I was willing to give credence because of the way he's acting here. But yeah, he says, I can't do any more to the security without them noticing. And he maybe gives it a full 26 hours, which is what Vorkosigan is asking for. He's like, hopefully. Oh my God, I just realized, like, well, I guess I don't have that much more to get through because I'm like so over time. I didn't even notice. Ugh, you guys, I can't believe how much I can talk. People talk about how like hard it is to deliver a 5-minute speech. And I'm out here talking for like 3 hours and I'm still going over time. Don't even notice. Jesus, I'm a fucking maniac. Okay. So let's see. He talks to Cordelia about the battle cruiser explosion and is like, that wasn't a real one, was it? Somebody wants to claim a kill. And she says, go ahead. But she's expecting him to keep asking questions and he doesn't. And this is, you guys, this was understandably underlined by a lot of people in my Kindle. But she says, if your emperor dislikes Faruchir, why did he put him in charge? Because he was Grishnov's man and widely famous as such, and the prince's favorite, putting all the bad eggs in one basket, so to speak. And she says, he made me feel like I'd met the ultimate in evil. I don't think anything will really scare me after that. Guess Faruchir? He was just a little villain, an old-fashioned craftsman making crimes one-off. The really unforgivable acts are committed by calm men in beautiful green silk rooms who deal death wholesale by the shipload, without lust or anger or desire or any redeeming emotion to excuse them but cold fear of some pretended future. But the crimes they hope to prevent in that future are imaginary. The ones they commit in the present, they are real. Okay, take me to church. Jesus fucking Christ. That was poetry. This writer is on it. I'm just saying, damn. I felt like I had been poked between the eyes. I mean, I don't feel like I ever stopped to compare the types of evil, but objectively, that feels absolutely correct. I feel like I need to put that somewhere. I don't know. It's just devastating. Anyway, he asks her, how is it that you are so patient? And he calls her calm as moonlight on water. And she says, is that pretty? And he says, very. It sounds nice. We don't have either one at home. She was absurdly pleased by the implied compliment. I cannot imagine not knowing what moonlight on water looks like. I mean, really? She says they have water, though. They have little salt puddles. I don't know. But not a moon, evidently. So Bothari eventually begins to wake up. They don't want to use another drug on him because they're worried that it's going to fucking kill him again. Cordelia has another nap. Oh, here, she slept a long time, not waking until Ilium returned with another tray of food. Maybe that's the drugging? So Cordelia says, have they started landing troops yet? Commodore Vorkosigan, we're getting something very strange here. Do you want me to shunt a copy of Raw incoming straight down there? Yes, please, immediately. And Cordelia is thinking to herself, oh, here it comes. And there we hear this transmission that gets cut off. And these dudes are getting pummeled. Let's see. Cordelia recognized the voice with a start and craned her neck for a view of his face. It was Gotchian. Evidently, he had his captaincy at last. I'm going to drop shields altogether and attempt to knock one out with maximum burst. Don't do it, Korobik, Vorkosigan shouted hopelessly. The decision, whatever it was, had been made an hour ago, and its consequences fixed in time. I didn't even think about that. Like, this isn't happening instantly. And I think this is so interesting because, like, I'm way over time and I'm just accepting it because I only have like 2 pages left in this chapter. But, you know, anytime that we watch stuff present day, we're so used to streaming being instantaneous or close to it that people on ships, you know, when we have these like space operas, they are seeing things immediately. And understandably, in the era of 80 something and the distance between these people when we're talking like light years, you know, if we're going through wormholes and stuff, there's going to be more of a delay. And although I understand not doing it this way because it adds a level of complication to things, to storytelling, most of the time, it's really interesting to see it here. I liked this. And finally, he says, I can't come to the tactics room without breaking my arrest. Where is Commodore Helsky or Kor? And he's like, Kor is here, but you're the ranking flag officer. And he says, the prince was quite explicit. I believe the prince is dead, sir. And he says, what about Vorhalas? And he's like, Vorhalas was with him. It's confirmed. You're in command. Vorkosigan's face was cold and unhappy. Then transmit contingency blue orders at once. All ships cease firing immediately. And he explains that they have a new weapon system on Escobar called a plasma mirror field. It's a new Betan development. And when he gets off the phone, so to speak, Cordelia is like, how the fuck did you know about the plasma mirrors? And he says, you told me in your sleep under the influence of one of the surgeon's potions. And she says torture would have been more honorable. And I'm like, would it? And also, part of what you like about him is that he does what he needs to do. I'm going to need you to keep that energy. That's all I'm saying, Cordelia. I'm not saying you don't have a right to be pissed, but I'm just saying, like, keep in mind what about him is like the thing. And do you just expect him to make exceptions because he likes you? Because, like, that's just so not him. I thought we all knew that. But also, it's weird that she didn't notice. So, okay, I really have to wrap up. I'm 20 minutes over. Ridiculous. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Thank you, Vicky, for commissioning this. Appreciate it a lot. I really hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. I'm really enjoying the book. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.